For this demo of the DataCAD shadow macro, I've created a drawing with a selection of entities in it. We've got a tree symbol which was exploded on placement, got a tree symbol and a leaf symbol there which are in the drawing as symbols. We've got a simple rectangle of 2D walls with roof framing above, which was created with a frame it macro, so those roof framing members are slabs. We have an open cylinder, a closed cylinder, a closed truncated cone, a half sphere and a torus. So the first thing we need to do obviously is to invoke the macro, and I'll just work down the options here and explain them as we go along. So we need to tell the macro a little bit about where we are and what we want to cast shadows of and where we want to cast the shadows. So first thing we need to tell it is where north is in relation to the drawing. So if we click on that button, we'll see that north is currently pointing straight up. We can change that simply by selecting 2 points. So we'll change it and just confirm that the indicator arrow in the bottom corner is updated, which it has. We can dismiss that arrow with the escape key. Next thing we need to say is to let the macro know where the sun is. So if we click on that, we come to the sun position menu, and we'll see that there are a few ways that we can enter the sun position. We can enter altitude and azimuth manually. We're not going to do that today. We can use the sun calculator, which I will use in a minute, or we can use a saved value. So you can see previously I've calculated some values for a location in Simsbury, Connecticut, and we could in fact recall any of those values and use those, but we're going to use the sun calculator right now. The sun calculator is a separate program. Normally it comes up pretty quickly, but there may be a bit of a delay if you're using it for the first time in particular. So we need to tell the calculator latitude, longitude, time zone, and for the purpose of a macro it needs a place name and an abbreviation. So we'll key that information in. For altitude and longitude, I like to get those values from Google Maps, which I will do now. So if we go to Google Maps and right click and say what's here, that will bring up a box which tells us latitude and longitude, so we can key those values into the calculator. This is a location in New South Wales, Australia, so the time zone should be +10, and we'll give it a place name. The abbreviation normally defaults to the last word or two in your place name. You can modify that if you wish to, and I will, just for the purpose of a demo. We'll call it Fox Lane OB. We need to keep it reasonably brief. And that's the information that we need to do the calculation, but we need to tell the program which dates and times we wish to calculate for. So as you can see, each of these can be enabled or disabled by a checkbox. We can select as many or as few of those and calculate the combinations. We can also obviously change these dates, so let's change that one to today, and we can change the time. So for the purpose of exercise, we'll change that to 3:15 p.m. and we might as well calculate 6 p.m. while we're at it, and we'll calculate the whole lot. We'll change this one to Christmas Day just for the purpose of the exercise. Now if we calculate, we'll see that it's calculated altitude and azimuth for each of those date time combinations, except for a couple of early evening ones in winter where it says the sun's too low. You'll get that sun too low message if the calculated altitude is below 1 degree. So you can't use those date time combinations in the macro. What we can do is we can just single click on one of these, and I'm going to single click on that one, and we'll see that it says altitude and azimuth transferred to DataCAD. So we should now have these values sitting in the macro when we go back to it. But I want to keep all of these calculated values for later use, so I'm going to say export to macro. And when we go back to the macro, first thing it says is the sun position has been changed, and this is the one that we clicked on. If we just click OK on that, and go back into the Sun Position menu, we'll see that this is now no longer Simsbury, it's now Fox Lane OB is the filter, and we can see the values that we calculated. If we want to narrow that down so we're not looking at so many values there, we can add a filter that's a little bit more specific. So let's say September Astor Fox Lane OB. And now we've just got the 3 times that we calculated for September. It's already set to the 9 AM one. So if we now return to the macro main menu, we've set north, we've set sun position. Next thing we need to do is tell the macro which entities we want to cast shadows of. So if we select that, we'll see that we get a list of the 8 selection sets. Now the macro needs to use at least one selection set, but you can tell it which one you wish it to use. I'm going to leave that at selection set 1. I'll clear the set just in case there's something in it that I'm not aware of, and I'm going to add all these entities to that set. And we can see that they've been highlighted to confirm that they've added, so that's good. I can press escape key to get rid of that highlight and just come back out of that menu into the main menu. The next thing we need to tell it is the surface we want to cast shadows onto. By the way, I'll come back to these options that I've skipped over. I'll come back to them a little bit later. So if we say surface and fixed Z or polygon are the options. Now to use a polygon option, you can select a polygon that's at any orientation at all. It could be vertical, it could be horizontal, it can be anywhere in between. If we use fixed Z, that simply specifies a horizontal surface at a fixed Z height. For the purpose of the exercise, I'll change that to minus 100 millimeters. And we'll go back to the main menu. Now, that's all the information we need to calculate the shadows. We need to tell the macro if we want them to be drawn with solid fill or not. If we deselect solid fill, then they'll be drawn as what is effectively a wireframe shadow. But the cover option is available in DataCAD 19.01 and later versions. So if you don't see that option on your menu, that will be why. That adds a renderable cover to the created shadow, which means if you render it using the shader or the object viewer, then the shadow will show up. If you don't select that option, or if you're using a version prior to DataCAD 19.01, then your shadows will not render. Now we can specify a colour for our shadows, so we'll just say cyan, or we could just say, look, use whatever the current colour is, but I'm specified a colour there. We can say, look, just draw the shadows on the active layer, and for many of you that will be fine. I've specified a layer of shadow. If you key in a new layer here, then it'll be created, otherwise it'll select the existing layer. And that's all the information we need, so I'm just going to press start there now. And there we have what's effectively our wireframe shadows. As you can see, it may be quite adequate for what you need, but I'm going to delete those right now and recreate them as a filled shadow. So if we come back into the macro, say solid fill and start. And there the shadows have been created with a solid fill, which does make it a little bit more obvious exactly what's going on. So we can do shadows for another time. We can choose a 3:15 PM. We might decide to do those in a different colour so that we can keep track of what we've done. I'll use a custom colour. And we can specify cover, whatever you like. You can do them on the same layer or a different layer. I'll press start, and these shadows I'm expecting to be cast towards the east because they're afternoon shadows and the sun is in the west. So that's pretty much what we expected to see. Now, let's have a look at the polygon surface option, but before we do that I'll just point something out with these shadows, and that is if you identify the shadows you'll see that they've been created as a symbol, and the symbol name tells you a little bit about it. So the symbol name for this one is Shadow SEP7 315P Fox Lane Oberon, and then there's a date and timestamp of creation. If we identify this one, the name is pretty similar except it's 9 AM. So it's useful to be able to see exactly what you've done. Now let's just create a polygon to cast shadows on. For the sake of this exercise I'm going to create a vertical polygon and just assume that we're going to do a study of shadows cast on the wall of an adjacent building. So we'll create our polygon vertically. We'll use base height and we'll just set those, make sure they're... So I'll change the base to -100 to match up with the plane that we cast, and we'll say it's a fairly high wall. We'll say it's 8 meters high. We draw our polygon, and there it is. Now if we go back into the macro, we choose surface, we can choose polygon, and we can choose that one. And we now see there's an extra option which is trim shadow that's become visible. I'll talk about that in a minute. I'll leave that enabled for now. We might just change our colour. And start. Says it's created shadows for 203 entities. We can't see them because we're looking straight down on top of a vertical polygon. If we were to go to a perspective view, say, we can see there's our polygon there, and here are the shadows which have been created on it. It might be even more obvious from an elevation sort of view. So there we can see it. If we turn off this trim shadow option, then I'll create shadows for this also. We might just change the colour once more just so that we've got a difference between each of our diagrams. So I've turned trim shadow off. We've still selected the same vertical polygon, but what we're going to see now is that it effectively treats that polygon as an infinite vertical surface. So although it uses a polygon to define the plane, the shadows are not limited to that area. So that's the function of a trim shadow. Now the other menu options that I skipped over earlier, highlight, we can come into there and say show entities, and it'll highlight the entities wherever we are, which can be useful to see. Also under highlight you can change the way things are highlighted. So currently they're highlighted by being drawn in a dashed grey line with an increased weight. If I can change the colour, I might say I want to highlight them in red and I want them as solid. So I want them as solid. I've managed to click the right thing there, and I don't want to increase the weight. Now if I highlight the entities, they're simply drawn in red. So I've got a few options I can change, and I can once again the surface I can highlight that as well, and I've got similar options I can change there, but independently, so that I can always tell the difference between the surface and the entity highlight. The other option on the main menu that I skipped over earlier was the sun eye view. Now I think that's reasonably self-explanatory, but there we are. We're looking from the sun position, so the shadows are directly behind the entities that we're casting them off. So this can be a good way to visualize what the impact of a shadow is going to be without actually drawing the shadow. I hope this has been a useful demonstration. The macro is available for free download, so I'm hoping that you'll download it and see if it's useful to you, and I hope it is useful. Thanks for watching the demo.